I want you to think about the first philosophy class that you ever took and what ideas really stuck with you after it was over. If you've never taken a philosophy class before, what do you think a philosophy class is like, and what ideas do you think would be useful to you once it's over? My name is Sophia Paz, and I currently teach philosophy. But I have a confession to make. I didn't always have such a favorable view of philosophy. In fact, when I was signing up for classes my first semester of college, I did sign up for a philosophy class, but only because I had to. I remember thinking, this could be a good thing. I'll get my philosophy requirements out of the way early on, and this will free me up to do some things that are more useful. Needless to say, my first philosophy class stuck with me long after it was over. It completely changed the trajectory of my life because I went into philosophy. But transitioning to teaching has made me realize that not everybody wants to go into philosophy, and many of my students share my initial perception of philosophy, and many of them wonder, do I need this? How is this going to help me? And this question really sticks with me in my research because I want to make sure that it is accessible and approachable to anybody, regardless of whether they are interested in philosophy or not. And so today I want to share with you my research in the philosophy of action, specifically how desires, intentions, and beliefs work together to form actions. And I want to also ask us to think about how a conception of action might be informing how we think about somebody's character. Can we know something about someone's character based off of how they act? I specifically think that this research will be helpful to everyone, but also specifically to those of us who know somebody who is currently struggling with an addiction. Why is that particularly helpful? Well, we who want to be supportive to someone struggling with an addiction or understanding of their situation ought to make sure that our underlying and implicit beliefs and ideas in fact are in line with our claims of wanting to be supportive. It's possible that some of our ideas don't really encourage us to be supportive. And it might be that people who are currently struggling with an addiction ought to be exempt from how we ordinarily think of action. And if that's the case, we need to make sure we're aware of that and stop using a particular model of action when dealing with a loved one who might be currently struggling with an addiction. Again, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm not here to tell you what you do think. The whole process that I want to undergo with you is a process of reflection. Let us think and challenge our own ideas and assumptions. Let us discover them, let us challenge them, and let us make sure that they are encouraging us to be as compassionate and supportive as we want to be. So let's start by just asking about our basic conception of action. How do we view action? What happens before we act? And not in a scientific sense. So observe the following action. I have picked up a cookie. Now, the whole point of this, again, is to just get us thinking. This is really a starting point for us. And so I'm going to suggest a model, but you should view it as a starting point. If you don't already agree with that model, great. What model would you come up with? But again, we have to start somewhere. So let's start with this basic model about how I ultimately acted in getting this cookie. So I desired this cookie. I really wanted it. I believed that it was right there sitting on my desk. I formed an intention to grab it, and then I grabbed it. Now, with this example, again, fairly simple, straightforward example, the model seems pretty accurate. I had a desire. I believed that it was on my desk. If I believed it wasn't on my desk, I wouldn't have reached towards my desk. I formed an intention. I told myself, you are going to reach over and grab that cookie, and then I did. Seems simple enough, straightforward. The reality is a little bit more complicated though. Most of the time, we don't just have a singular desire. We have lots of desires, and a lot of the times they compete with each other. So, for instance, I want to eat this entire cookie right now. But there's another part of me that doesn't, because the last time I ate a cookie like this in one sitting, my stomach did not feel great. So I have a desire to eat this cookie all in one sitting, and I have a desire to not eat this cookie all in one sitting because of the impending stomach ache I'll get. So what happens now? Well, let's say that I actually do end up eating this entire cookie in one sitting. What happened? Now, here's an important question to ask. Was my desire to eat this cookie stronger than my desire to not eat this cookie? This is an important question for us to reflect on. And there are many different answers, but let's explore some of them. One answer is yes. My desire to eat that cookie must have been stronger than my desire to not eat the cookie because I ate the cookie. And so it would seem like when we have competing desires, the stronger desire determines how we act. Now, does this mean that we can learn something about people's desires based off of their actions? If I constantly choose the cookie time and time again, can we safely assume that I must really love cookies? Like I must really desire cookies? Again, with this basic model, seems pretty reliable. It seems pretty safe to say, yes, we can tell that you really desire this cookie based off of the fact that you keep picking up the cookie and eating it all in one sitting. But you might be thinking, no, that doesn't sound quite right because I can defeat my desires. So the strongest desire must not always determine what we pick, because maybe the desire to eat that cookie is my strongest desire. But if I have the mental fortitude, if I just close my eyes and I tell myself, no, you can't eat that cookie, I won't. Many people view this exercise as having willpower, right? As telling yourself, I have a really strong desire to do something, but I'm not going to. Why isn't this just another desire? Well, I might actually be pretty miserable doing it. I might be staring at this cookie all day on my desk and thinking, I really wish that I could eat this cookie. Or I'm so annoyed that I can't eat this cookie, but I'm not going to, right? We might not feel particularly happy. And so, right, now we're getting into some other issues about, the relationship between happiness and desire. We're going to set that aside for now and at least understand that the pull for thinking that willpower is not necessarily another desire. It certainly does not feel like another desire. It feels, in fact, like I'm doing something I don't want to do. And so, again, more philosophical questions are being raised here, and I hope you can see how more are going to continue to spring up. But for now, we're going to set them aside. And so even if you think, no, I think willpower ultimately can overcome our strongest desires and determine action, we might still learn something about a person based off of this. So if a person continues to succumb to the cookie and constantly choose the cookie over anything else, you might think that they have a fairly weak willpower, or they don't have willpower, right? At least not around that cookie. So if we're gonna hang out, I'm gonna make sure it's nowhere near where you can get this cookie or something like that. Obviously, it's a little bit more of a silly example, but I think that you get the idea. I might think, you're not very reliable when it comes to hanging around the cookie shop, because you're gonna be late because you're gonna prioritize, you're gonna go get that cookie or something like that. And so I might make judgments about your character in light of the fact that you can't seem to overcome this desire to get a cookie. Now, why is it important to know this? Both of these models, whether you said yes or whether you said no, are fairly simple and straightforward. And in many ways, they seem reliable and they seem accurate. But we need to be careful. If we do adopt these models as is, and we're using them to then make judgments about some people, especially those who are currently struggling with an addiction, maybe we aren't being as supportive or compassionate as we ought to be. Addiction is an incredibly complicated topic, and there's a lot of science to be done to tell us exactly the role that addictions can play in brain chemistry, for example. And it is important for us to be aware of these facts, because it might be inappropriate at times to use these models to make judgments about people who may have succumbed to their addictions. One model suggests that the object of their addiction is something that they desire more than anything else. The other model suggests that they're just weak. Neither of those responses seems particularly accurate in light of what we do know about addiction. And so maybe we should be more careful with how we apply these models. Maybe we should amend these models. Maybe we should just not apply them at all when it comes to dealing with a loved one or a family member or a friend or coworker who is currently struggling with addiction, because maybe it's just not appropriate given the changes that addiction can make to a person. And it's important to even know whether we should do that in order to make these meaningful changes. First and foremost, we have to just be aware of what we think. And that's something that philosophy is able to offer you regardless of what topic, or regardless of what job, or regardless of what ideas we're talking about. We have to discover our own ideas first before we can really examine how they influence our actions, how they influence our behaviors. And when we're dealing with a loved one who is currently battling an addiction, it's one way in which we can try to be supportive and compassionate, examining ourselves and asking ourselves, what do I believe? Should I be applying these models to you when I make judgments about you? Maybe, maybe not. Again, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to help guide you through this process. Again, we've just barely touched the surface. This has just been a taste of the kind of reflection that we can do when examining the philosophy of action and how it impacts our relationships with people who are currently struggling with an addiction. And that's something that I do love about philosophy. It is a journey of discovery, and it can be a journey of self-discovery. And so I hope that you will join me in this journey of self-discovery and trying to be sympathetic and compassionate people, especially when we are dealing with a loved one currently battling an addiction. And I hope that you will join me in this journey of self-discovery. Thank you for your time.